Are you wanting to close the year out strong? Our Change Coaches offerings include everything from retreat facilitation to leadership accelerators. Check out changecoaches.io for more information or email us at info@changecoaches.io to find out how we can support you and your organization in 2024 and beyond. Welcome to the Leading Below the Surface podcast, where we go beyond the book and explore how to navigate and thrive in today's changing workplace. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leading Below the Surface podcast. I'm LaTonya Wilkins, your host, and today I have a guest, very special guest. This guest I met at ICF, which is International Coaching Federation. They have a Midwest conference every 2 years. I met Ryan at ICF Midwest. We really clicked. We talked a lot. We met at a couple different breakouts and sessions, and we had a lot of really interesting discussions. One of the sessions we met at was around neurodiversity. And so I invited Ryan to talk about this because he is an ADHD coach. And so welcome, Ryan.
LaTonya, thanks so much for having me. It's great to see you again. I know both of us have had crazy schedules since the conference, and I just pulled this up in preparation for our conversation. And for those who might just be listening, this is the program we had from our Midwest conference, and the title, the theme of it was Flow Boldly. And before we hit record, LaTonya and I were just saying how neither of us is too worried about this because we're just going to flow naturally in this thing.
Right. Yes. Flowing. And this is like one of the strengths of the Leading Below the Surface podcast. It's all about flowing. And some of you probably listened to our last episode on improv. And so, but anything you want to add to my intro? What else?
I am not just saying this because I'm on your podcast, but LaTonya had a session around what this podcast is about, leading under the surface, and what does that mean? And it was just so impactful for me. And the ability that LaTonya has to get into the deeper topic with the audience or with her clients, you can just tell that she's passionate about what she does. And so I knew that that was just the beginning of some exciting conversations we would have. And I wore the shirt to commemorate our first meeting. And I was wearing this shirt. And I remember I was staying in an Airbnb like a mile away from the hotel. So I had to hustle to get to her early morning session. And my shirt says, "Never give up," because for those of us who may identify as neurodivergent, we have to overcome a lot of obstacles every day, both in the workplace and at home. So I always make sure to spread the message to whoever needs to hear it today to just never give up.
Yeah, I think that's such a timely message, not giving up. It's interesting because this morning I was telling my team, I'm like, yeah, this morning I did a meditation. It was all about patience. And it's like not giving up and having patience around the pace of the universe, which has been kind of my theme, is the universe has a different pace than sometimes I want to.
I absolutely love that.
Yeah. So just really been thinking about that. So I know you are an ADHD coach, right? Is that what you call yourself?
Yeah. So I call myself a certified ADHD coach. And one of the areas of focus for me, especially this year, has been focusing more on my neuro inclusion program, which is taking what I've done with individuals and groups and bringing that into the workplace to really help to foster more welcoming environments, which I know is something that you've worked really hard to create at the organizations you work with and the one that you're leading. So yes, I have ADHD myself, and I basically describe it as I became the resource that I so desperately needed during my time in the corporate world, but just couldn't find anywhere. And so the fact that I am wired the same way as many of my clients are, there's just this deep connection that happens right away because I see them and I tell them, hey, you are creative, you are a beautiful person, regardless of what challenges you may have faced. So it's just great to be able to provide that space of belonging for them.
Mm. So that's a really good place to start. So you're talking about neurodiversity and inclusion and how those two go hand in hand. So let's first talk about neurodiversity and what it is, because I think a lot of folks listening, they might have a high level knowledge. I know I was at that level, kind of a novice. I still don't consider myself real advanced. I would probably say intermediate, but
Yeah.
we do have some people that are brand new to this. So let's first talk about what is neurodiversity. I say neurodiversity. I know there's also the word neurodivergence, which makes me
Well,
feel like that's separate. So,
and it is, and that's
okay,
exactly where I was going to go with this.
okay.
And thank you for giving me the opportunity to bring some awareness, because that's really what I see one of my main roles as. I know that you talk a lot about leading beneath the surface, and what my sort of tagline is I want to help, especially business leaders, to start, I'm using air quotes, seeing the invisible. And what I mean by that is seeing the invisible potential that might not be apparent right away in people who are neurodivergent. So let's talk about the difference. Every group of people, no matter how big or what part of the world you're in, that is neurodiversity. Because what it means is that no two brains, I'm using four fingers, no two brains are exactly the same. So that brings diversity of thought. And obviously, up until just the last couple of years, diversity was always looked at from what's your identification of gender or sexual orientation, or what's your race, or your, all these different areas for diversity. But people were thinking of that from the outside. This is more inside. How is your brain wired? So if you picture a bell curve, most of the people that are in, the middle of the curve, that's what would be referred to as a neurotypical group of people. So they are wired in a very similar way, but still different from each other. But out on the edges, that's where those of us who would identify as neurodivergent are, because we are clinically divergent from the majority of people out there. So an individual person can be neurodivergent, but it is groups of people who are neurodiverse.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's kind of like diversity versus diverse candidate, because
Yes,
there's no
exactly.
such thing as a diverse candidate, and it's
Yeah,
like being called that is like an insult, because it's not. It's
right.
like you have a diversity in the pool. So when I hear the word neurodivergence, I feel like it's othering. What do you think?
I think it depends on the audience and
Okay.
not the educational, but the level of understanding that they might have around the topic. Because I take a lot of pride in identifying as neurodivergent. And yes,
Mhm.
it is othering in some ways. I've never heard that term, but I really like it. Um, and I bring something very unique to the table, and I know that. And there's a phrase or a word that gets thrown around a lot in the neurodiversity space, and specifically people that may have ADHD or autism, about having a quote unquote superpower. I do not like that at all, because that makes it seem like it's only a positive. But I would say that those of us with a neurodivergent condition, we have exceptional gifts, but we have very unique challenges.
Mm. Exceptional gifts, but unique challenges. I love that as a soundbite for this. Like that is like the essence of everything we're talking about. Yeah. And the
Because yes,
world's
they're
made, isn't the world made for neurotypical people?
correct. So imagine you as a listener or a viewer right now, imagine growing up in a world that you just knew the whole time. You never really felt like you fit in. There was just something different, something unlike most of the people around you. And that no matter how hard you tried doing something the way everyone else was doing it, you just couldn't get yourself to do that. And that's essentially how I felt, that I am living in a world that's not built for me.
Mm. So let's unpack this a bit.
Yeah.
So when did you know you were first different and how?
hmm So what's interesting, and this will be a good kind of high level thing to talk about first, even just the label that those of us with our brain wiring have, ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. So it already seems like there's something wrong with us because it's disorder. And then it makes it seem as though we don't have attention to give. But that's so inaccurate, because it's not that we have a deficit in attention. We just have variability in our attention, where a neurotypical person, so like I'm going to say an average normal person, and normal's another triggering word for people, but people who are neurotypical can call upon their attention at will. And they can say, okay, this might not be my favorite thing to do, but because it's a priority to my company or someone needs me to do this, I'm going to do it. For someone like me who is neurodivergent, when I go to do that task that I'm not really interested in or not really good at, it's almost like going to try to start your car and the spark plug isn't working. Like you just hear like the engine like nying, 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 like it's turning over. It won't go. So it's not that we don't want to do the thing, or even that we don't know how, or that it's important. We know all those things. It's just that there is a biophysical, biochemical impediment that stops us from doing the thing. So where this came into my life is throughout grade school, I did really, really well. And a lot of times that had to do with my mom, when I was growing up, would read my textbooks to me. And we didn't think much of it. It was just, that was kind of our routine, our ritual, is we would sit down and mom would read, I would listen just like it was story time, and I could see everything in my mind. But then later on, when it was time for me to start reading, obviously I knew how to read, but to start studying myself, there just was this absorption and retention issue. And I also have dyscalculia, which is a challenge with numbers. And so when I
Mhm.
could understand, when I could see how the thing worked, that was okay. But then when you got to a certain, like the algebra and like junior high and high school, the wheels really started falling off for me. So it was really weird, because I'd always done really well. And then all of a sudden, it seemed like almost overnight, it was like, oh man, I don't know how to do this. And where I noticed it the most was I was in a math class in high school. And it was like, no matter how much I studied, no matter, like how hard I was working, I was almost always the last person to finish the exam. And not that I have to be first or anything, but it just seemed really strange. I'm like, I think I should know this material. I just feel like this is not normal. So we looked into it, and sure enough, as the doctor, the psychiatrist, was reading through the description of ADHD, it sounded awfully familiar. And it was like hearing an autobiography being read about me. But it was actually a big
Mm.
sense of relief, because it helped me to accept the fact that it wasn't something I was doing wrong.
Okay.
So it's like, if this is just how you are, it's like, you're wearing glasses, which are very fashionable. Are they also prescription glasses?
Of course, I would
Okay.
not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I just don't want to assume, because sometimes I'm like, you wear glasses, and they're like, oh, these are actually just for, yeah. But if someone wears glasses or contacts, like imagine you being told your whole life, like, just squint harder. Everyone else can see. Just look at the board and squint harder, and look harder and you'll see it. It's like, no, it just doesn't work that way. So realizing that that's how it was for me, for my brain, it was like, oh, so there's that sense of relief for me.
Mm.
So that's how it first came about. And then from there, I was able to start getting accommodations put in place. And in schools, in a school setting, most high schools and colleges will have support structures in place. It was once I got into the working world where it's a total roll of the dice if you're going to get the support you need or not.
Mm. So thank you for sharing all that. Would you
Sure.
say that, so I know it took you longer, it was a little harder. Would you say that your grades were affected and like in a very traditional system, or would you say you simply needed accommodations?
So when we got into certain categories of math and sciences,
Mhm.
it would be like, imagine writing something in your mind's notebook, if you will, and then you go to the test and you're in your mind, you open the notebook and the pages are blank. It's like, wait a minute. No, no, no. I just wrote these in my mind last night. Like they should
Mm,
definitely be here. But for certain topics that like my brain decides, oh, I'm not really interested in this, it just can't hold on to those concepts. Um, so it was definitely, yes, I needed more time, but there was absolutely an impact to my GPA and things like that too.
okay. What helped you? Like, what kind of accommodations did you need specifically that would help you? And this way, that might help other people as well.
Sure. I'll never forget this experience in college. It was almost like something out of a movie when you're in that kind of stadium style seating, like a lecture hall, and there's like over 100 people taking the exam. Well, while everyone else was hard at work doing their accounting, which was one of my arch nemesis subjects, all I could hear was people chomping on their gum or tapping their foot or clicking their pen. And it's not that I wanted to hear those. It's just that those of us with ADHD, we just have a heightened awareness even when we don't want to. So, like, I remember being a recent grad and I was in my apartment and my roommate had hung a clock like in the hallway and I could hear the ticking in my room. So I had to take the battery out of the clock. It's that kind of thing. Like, so the accommodations I got during that time, I had what I assume would be like a panic attack, basically, where I had to like go to the bathroom, like putting like cold water on my face, like, hey, everything's fine. You're gonna do this. And so I got the accommodations of being able to have a distraction reduced environment. So I could go to the testing center where there's not a lot of
Mm,
visual or auditory distractions. I get to wear earplugs and then I would get time and a half to take the exam. Um, and so that's something that I qualify for, and it's not going to hurt anybody else uh, or anything. So that really helped a great deal.
mm. Yeah, I didn't even know. I think we talked about this at
Mhm.
ICF Midwest that the oversensitivity to noise and
Mhm.
activity is something that happens when you are neurodivergent. And I'm curious because I know you said you knew you were different from a young age. I mean, I could say that for other reasons, but did you get made fun of? The kids underestimate you? What'd you feel like?
Not really, because a lot of like even while these challenges were happening, throughout high school, college, and even into the working world, on the flip side, as I said a little bit earlier, we had exceptional gifts. We had these strengths that would outshine any of our weaknesses. So, for example, like when you and I got on to the episode here today, I'm not nervous at all to come on and it's just a conversation. Just like when I present in front of hundreds or thousands of people, I'm not really nervous. Whereas other people obviously have a lot of stage fright or they really shut down in front of large groups. I was the student government president and head of the spirit and rally committee in high school. So I was up in front of our entire school on the microphone, getting everybody cheering. I'm like, calling the sections out, tossing candy into the, stands and stuff. So no, they weren't making fun of me because some people admired the fact and they didn't know that my challenges about not being able to do well in math courses or whatever. And I never let it hold me back or make an excuse, because that's one thing that I think is important for people to know when it comes to accommodations, that we as neurodivergent folks we still expect ourselves to be held to the same exact standards as far as results and output. And that's, when I do my neuro inclusion training for corporate leaders, I'm helping them to see it's not that they get that a neurodivergent employee gets special treatment. It's just helping the employee to be able to show up as their best self.
Mm.
There's a concept known as masking, where it's essentially, you said growing up in a world that wasn't really made for me. So when I'm in those situations where I know this is not a strength, I'm having to like expend a lot of energy trying to maintain this persona, this image, this facade, essentially, when that's not the best use. Just like, why don't you just put me in a better spot so that I can just be who I am, so I can help add value.
Hmm.
And I'm thinking in college, like the best job I ever had in my entire life, hands down, was when I was a campus tour guide in college. So I loved that because I could internalize the script. I knew I had to cover certain, bullet points, but I could put my own personal spin on it with stories and talking about experiences and whatnot. And there was times where parents would come up to me afterwards and say, "Hey, Ryan, do you have any plans after graduation?" And I would literally get job offers from people because my skill set is valuable. So I just know that there's things I don't do well and things that I excel at.
Mm. So you obviously have a lot of self-awareness, and obviously, you're a coach and then you do this
Mhm.
work
Right.
professionally for a living. And so one of the things I think we all struggle with, like we don't have the knowledge that you have. And one of the questions that I asked you and some other folks at ICF Midwest, I'd love to pose for my listeners so they can hear it as
Yes,
well.
please.
But so let's say you meet someone and they tell you they have ADHD and they're a colleague, or maybe there's someone
Sure.
that is a friend. What are some tactics we can use in order to maximize that relationship? Because I shared with me, I was struggling because I didn't know that person had ADHD, and they revealed that to me later, but then I didn't know what to do with it. So what can we do to help people?
Well, I know that there's a phrase out there I heard recently that it applies to a lot of situations, but it also applies to someone who may be neurodivergent, which is when you met one person with ADHD, you've met one person with ADHD. In other words, my best advice to anyone who's listening or watching or tuning into this, if you do have someone in your life, or you find out someone, whether they're on your team or a friend or whatever, has, and obviously I can speak to ADHD specifically, but you can just ask them, like, "Hey, thanks for sharing that with me. Is there anything I can do to make sure that, whether it's friendship or in the workplace, like, what can I do to help you be your best and show up as your authentic self?" And I would have loved to have been asked that by leaders or managers, because I would have said, as I had to request later with formal accommodation requests, "Hey, I'm a very distractible person. So it's not good for me to be sitting where I am, which is in an open office environment right alongside the main walkway." I worked at a tech company. So it was like an open office, and then people were walking back and forth. Anybody who went to like go to the cafeteria, go to the bathroom, sales area where I was would walk past me. And then when they walked towards me, like just instinctively, you kind of look up. And about an arm's length away from me was the printer for the entire floor. So all like 200 some people, anytime they printed something, it was right by me. So what I would have loved if someone asked me that, because I would have said, "Can you just put me like over there on the outskirts facing away from everyone? And then I'll be able to focus a lot better." So it's just
Mm.
little things like that. Or if you're trying to have a conversation with someone, maybe the environment that you're in might be a little bit overstimulating, whether it's the lighting or the background noise. So I hope that helps.
Yeah. It's almost like asking them how you could best support,
Yeah,
like in those situations, because you're not a monolith. I think that's one of the things you're saying. It's not a monolithic thing. So asking the person, and maybe not being afraid of that as well, would you
yeah,
say? Because I think some people they get a little timid because they don't want to be rude.
sure.
But what are your thoughts on that?
And this also is right up against this other topic of, you mentioned to kind of set up this scenario that the person shares with you that they have ADHD because of the atmosphere that's out there and the stigma that still exists and persists around, I'll just say specifically ADHD, but other people who are on the neurodivergent spectrum. Sometimes people may not be comfortable just openly disclosing that they have that. But
Mhm.
if it's someone who does openly disclose and say, hey, I'm sorry, I have ADHD and this might be, hard for me or whatever. Well, then they've sort of given you, in this case, the person they're talking to, the green light that, okay, we're talking about it now. So if they say, I have ADHD, okay, hey, thanks so much for being willing to share that. Is there anything I can do to make this better for you? Is there anything in here that's too distracting or anything? Stuff like that.
Hmm. Yeah, that's excellent. Like the asking about specifically distractions
Yeah.
or things that might trigger the person.
I know,
So
for
yeah,
example, oh, sorry.
no,
Just
go ahead.
like when my wife and I go out to dinner or if we're going out with friends, if we're going to a place where there's going to be TVs, for example, I am very intentional about sitting with my backs to the television because I just have radical acceptance of myself, like as you alluded to, with just having self acceptance and self awareness, that I will not be able to be fully present with the person that I really would like to be present with if there's a TV anywhere in my purview. So I really try to sit in a spot where I don't see anything else except the people I'm with so that I can, you know, be with them and be fully present. So my wife is obviously, we've been together now, we've been married for 11 years, and she does a great job of like be just watching out for me in that way. Be like, hey, Ryan, do you want to sit over here? And even if we're not like broadcasting to everyone why, that's just little things like that can make a big
Okay.
difference.
Yeah. So what common mistakes do people make around accommodating neurodiverse people?
I'm really glad you asked this question because if I were to ask you, okay, LaTonya, when you think of ADHD, like what comes to your mind?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I know people that have shared with me that they
Mm-hmm.
have ADHD.
Mm-hmm.
So I think one of them was look at you, Coach Ryan. I think one of them. That's all. I know you're trying. You think you're sneaky, but you're not.
I'm
So
not. No, I'm not being sneaky. I'm
you're
asking that
coaching
question.
me. No, no.
No, I'm just
Yeah,
asking
yeah.
because
You're asking
I
me.
want to. I'm gauging how I want to answer your question.
Right, right,
I
right.
want to see where you're at
Yeah,
on.
yeah. So in this person, it's a good question because it's and I with the people that I know that have ADHD, what I've
Mm-hmm.
experienced is we never get everything done. Like we
Mm-hmm.
have a 30-minute meeting and we end up talking about a topic for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I think the focus, like my focus is different from the other person's. Again, it depends on if it's coaching, fine. But if it's
Yeah.
like a project meeting or something, uh, you only have so much time. And so,
Right.
yeah, it's hard to keep things within the lanes that I would like sometimes. Um, like those are a couple of examples, or
No,
they
that's
get really
great.
easily distracted. Those are a few
Perfect.
things. Yeah.
And it's now I see why you were laughing because you went in a much different direction than I was thinking. Because what I was going to say when I asked people like, "Hey, what do you think of?" and the sort of the stereotypical example is a grade school boy who can't sit still in class. Like that's sort of what I meant,
Mhm.
is
Mhm.
that's like the poster child for ADHD. Well, one of the biggest misunderstandings, which is now having a really big ripple effect, which I will explain, is that many times young women got completely overlooked growing up because there used to be two different forms, and this is in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. Right now, they're on the fifth edition. And it's been a really long time since they've updated it. But anyway, it used to be some people might relate because they've heard ADD and ADHD. So they think of ADHD as like that boy who can't sit still. And ADD previously was very much like that person who's more like they're a dreamer, they're inattentive, they can't really pay attention, they're spacey. But in the DSM-5, they brought these two together. So now the inattentive, the primarily inattentive presentation, as well as the primarily hyperactive presentation, are both under the umbrella of ADHD. So ADHD is kind of like the overarching term. But my point here is that women who they may have been very talented, but they weren't squirming in their seats or disturbing class. If they had challenges, people would say to them, and this is a very, again, stereotypical thing, how could you have ADHD? You're so smart. It's like, what? That doesn't even make sense. And oh no, you can't have ADHD. You're a girl, you're a woman. And it's like, no, it actually affects equal parts, equal split of male and female. The problem is not the problem, but the challenge is that most females would fall into more of the primarily inattentive type of ADHD, which means that the hyperactivity component is happening in their mind. In other words, when they're in a conversation with someone, they're off somewhere else. They're not really able to fully be present or focus. Whereas for
Mm.
me, the manifestation of it for me is this is why I love being a coach, because when I'm talking with someone, they are my world. They get 100% of my attention. And so the misunderstanding is that women got overlooked. And now, as a result, as they're growing up, they get misdiagnosed with anxiety, depression, generalized anxiety disorder, schizophrenia sometimes, when it was actually inattentive ADHD, but most people didn't realize that women can also have ADHD. So now there's this entire group of women.
So interesting.
Yeah. And it's wild because when I first heard it, I thought, well, that seems like kind of a big generalization. But the vast majority of women, whether they're clients or friends or just contacts of mine who I know who have ADHD, they were most likely diagnosed later in life. And where these symptoms start to show up, like they probably found coping mechanisms throughout life, but then when they have a big transition, like you get married or you get a new job or a baby comes along or you're moving or you have a wedding or there's a global pandemic, hypothetically, all of a sudden it's like, wow, I can't handle this for some reason, this is strange. And so all these women are starting to figure out, oh my gosh, I have ADHD. So that's, I would say, out of everything, we've already covered two of the biggest misconceptions. One is that if you have ADHD, you can't pay attention, which is not true. We just have situational, and things need to be new, novel, interesting, or something we enjoy. And that women can't have ADHD. Those are the two, I would say,
Yeah.
biggest.
I didn't realize this was so gendered because it's interesting because another interesting story. So one of my friends, her husband just got diagnosed with ASD.
Mm-hmm.
And then we started having a conversation about women and ASD or people that identify as women. And yeah, I guess that women just aren't, or people that identify as women aren't diagnosed, which I never even thought about that. Like that's something that is pretty prevalent.
It is. Yeah. And then as a result, so many people are out there, and that's part of the drive behind my mission of helping helping to change the way the world sees those of us with invisible
Mhm.
disabilities, because so many people are just getting missed. And that's why during the pandemic, when everyone was sort of forced to be at home, that's when things blew up for me in a good way on social media. I had been, about a year earlier, been let go from another corporate job because I couldn't do the administrative follow through component that was part of the job. So I started saying, you know what? I am done trying to pretend to be someone I'm not. I'm going to start sharing my story on social media. I went from 0 followers on, and this specifically was on TikTok at the time, 0 followers to 330,000 followers in 60 days,
Oh, wow.
where, just a few videos go viral and whatever. But it was like, I feel it was the perfect storm where this was a mess. It's much less about, Coach Ryan is the reason. I think it was because this was a time when people were ready to hear the message and they were seeing going, oh my gosh, that looks a lot like my life. I would get a lot of like, stop watching me, or like, do you have a surveillance camera in my house? Because this is exactly what it's like. Those kind of things. So that's when I started getting out there to spread the word more. Um, and even this next week, I'm going to the International ADHD conference, which happens every year. And it's just really gratifying, I guess, to see
Mhm.
that there is this growing awareness around it.
Mm. Such an interesting conversation, folks, but we do have limited time. So I do want to kind of get into our final question, which I think you have a lot to say about this, especially after you just talked about the conference that you're going to. But I know you also do training. You help a lot of folks. I follow you on LinkedIn. I know you have things there. We're connected there. So what tips do you have around leading across neurodiversity? And what are some of the things that you might share with companies that you'd be willing to share with the Leading Below the Surface audience today?
Absolutely. And I'm an open book because I want to put as much out there as I can, and certainly happy to take a deeper dive with anyone who wants to have a conversation. But after running my coaching business for, it's like 3.5, 4 years at the time, I was reaching a lot of people, but from a business perspective, I needed to figure out how to be able to keep this as a sustainable enterprise for me. And so it sort of dawned on me, okay, I was going from trying to help the individual or the group to help themselves so then they could go into the workplace and advocate. And it was actually a mentor of mine who said, why don't you just go pitch to the companies? You are a very polished
Mhm.
professional. Why don't you, and you've experienced it in the workplace. That's what you're most passionate about. Go talk to the leaders to educate them, and they already have money for this kind of stuff. So it was like, oh, this light bulb went off. Right. So now I have this neuro inclusion program where I can go in and help them to understand there are people on your team that are so close. Like Tony Robbins calls it, a 2 millimeter shift. If we can just make some slight adjustments, that you could unlock a superstar of an employee. One story that comes to my mind is that at one of the large organizations I worked for, again, gets back to my strengths, that I love being up in front of an audience. So part of my job was to go out to the various departments in this health system I was in and do presentations to the new employees, talk about benefits and things like that. Well, I saw some of my other colleagues doing it, and I was like, no wonder no one likes these. It was a sleeper. It was so boring. So then other departments would request that I come out to do the presentation. Can you please send Ryan? Because the other ones are really boring. So I went to some of my other colleagues who I knew didn't like presenting. And I said, hey, I'll tell you what, I'll take all of the departments that you are required to go speak to, and I'll do all the presentations for you if you just do some of my administrative stuff, like in the CRM system. And I remember my colleague was like, are you serious? You would do that? I'm like, yeah. She's like, that's too easy. Yeah, let's go. So we started doing this. People were loving it. And then my colleague was happy because for her, she could do all of the work I couldn't do in a fraction of the time I could. But then, dun, 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 I got called into the executive director's office and he says, "What's this I hear about you taking over all of the presentations for your colleague?" And I said, "Well, yeah, this is a concept known as job carving, where you essentially trade different pieces of the daily duties to get better results for the organization." So we were utilizing both of our strengths instead of both of us being forced to do things we're only average or below average at. And he just shook his head. And I remember how much shame I had when he's like, "Look, Ryan, that's a very creative idea, but please go back and do your job the way we told you to do it and let us come up with the solutions." Okay. Or something to that effect. Um, so what I do is help to go out there and raise the awareness around, if you could just help to provide a better environment for your employees, like, hey, what can we do to be better for you? Because there is a real bottom line impact on the cost of turnover, the cost of backfilling those positions, the recruiters who have to repeatedly try to do that. When what if you could just have an area where people could work quietly or work remotely or
Mm,
or have flexible start and leaving times? Like, why does it have to be 9 to 5? Someone created that one day. Well, what if it was 10 to 6? And that would allow the person to do what they need to do to get on to work on time instead of having them get disciplined and then eventually let go because of attendance issues. So that's just one little tiny example.
mm,
But just helping to make what I call sensible shifts in the organizational structure. And it all comes down to that conversation that you might have with a friend who discloses to you, what can I do to help you to be more effective, to be the best
mm.
you, to show up at work as your whole self? Because I think companies are surprised to realize how simple it actually is.
Yeah. Yeah, that's an excellent example around the job carving and like how organizations can be so rigid
Mhm.
when something that small could be the accommodation. It doesn't hurt anybody. It's just, yeah, you're as a leader, you just won't be able to control everything, but it doesn't hurt anyone. And it's not diminishing performance or anything like that or affecting performance in any
No,
way.
that's the part that was blowing my mind too. It was enhancing performance
Right,
because
right,
instead of having to
right.
follow up with Ryan to be like, "Hey, don't forget to update all your files in the CRM," or having to listen to another department complain about how boring the benefits presentation was, everything was going better. So that's the thing, is like, we're going for results because results get respect.
Right. Right. Yeah, this was so folks, I'm sure you learned a lot today. I know I did, and I expanded even my knowledge around this, even though I'm reading a couple books around neurodiversity right now. But where can people find you, Ryan? And I hear you're on TikTok. I didn't know that. I actually just got onto, I have to be careful on TikTok because
Yeah,
it can really take your time. And so you just get real absorbed in it. But I've started
it's a
at
slippery
least,
slope.
yeah, at least started like putting some feelers out there to
Well,
decide if we're
no,
going to do
that's,
more.
I understand. And my quick little snippet on that is, for the amount of content I put out, I quickly realized that I needed to do it selectively. So now I have a team that helps to distribute the content so that I don't get sucked into that slippery, slippery slope of
Right.
doom scrolling. So I realized, with my wife's help, when she said, "Hi, your family's over here," I'm like, right. So anyway, thank you so much again for having me on. This was as fun as I knew it would be. But people can find me on my website, which is ryanmayercoaching.com. And that's Mayer. And then I would say I would direct them actually more towards my YouTube, which is Ryan Mayer Coaching on YouTube. And you can find me on Instagram at ADHD Coach Ryan Mayer. But yes, I'm pretty much on all the platforms
Mhm.
and would love to just keep the conversation going with people around the value, not only of supporting other humans, but also for your business to learn more. And
Mhm.
my 3 steps in this neuro inclusion program, again, I'm an open book, is educate, equip, and empower. So educate the top leadership so they know what it is, kind of the stuff we talked about today. Equip midline managers of how to have conversations like the one we talked about, and then empower the frontline employees of how to advocate for themselves. Even if they are not comfortable disclosing, they can simply say something like, I do my best work when ...
Mhm. Mhm. Yes. So Ryan, before we close, I know you have a special gift you want to give the audience.
Oh my gosh, I almost forgot. Thank you for reminding me. So a huge change in my whole business. Like the whole goal here is to help more people more often. And one of the biggest barriers, which I'm sure you've run into, LaTonya, is price point sometimes. And the most heartbreaking thing for me was having great conversations, connecting with people on a deep level. And then they would hear how much my one-on-one or group coaching costs. And they go, oh, I can't afford that. A company approached me that could take my coaching and put it into an AI offering. So I want to offer free 7-day premium trial for all of the Lead Below the Surface fans out there. So we'll have a discount code in the show notes for you, but it's everything from my coaching, even my voice, which is like kind of crazy, all packaged in there. So you can check it out and have 24/7 access to my coaching.
Great. Thanks. We'll also put that in the show notes, folks.
Cool. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. And we'll also put all of this. He's got some dance moves, I see. We'll also, I don't know. Now I feel like we need some music here to close out, but we've run out of time, folks. But yeah, so we'll also put those links in the show notes. So thank you, folks, and we'll see you next time.